Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. We're back with another Frequently Asked Questions Friday, otherwise known as FAQ Friday. Now we've been doing the guitar of the week on the FAQ Fridays, so we were looking around the room. Look, I'm blessed, I have a schnizzle ton of guitars. But we thought we'd do something a little different this time. So actually, I have this. This, you may see, is normally hanging up next to the 24-track Studer over there, the A80 Mark II that I have. And as you can see, this is actually not my guitar. Well, it was my guitar, but I gave it to my son. So when we get artists in here, we have them sign the guitar. Quite a good splattering of people. I don't know if Eric, you can get in here, but this top one here is Ace Frehley. Now, I'm sure many of you know, I've done 3 albums with Ace Frehley. I've played guitar on his records, I've sung on his records, did some backgrounds, and of course I've mixed, co-produced, and engineered. So that is Ace Frehley there. Immediately below there is Brad Whitford, the other guitar player in, of course, Aerosmith. And these are all people that have come up to the studio up here and worked. There's Kevin Griffin from, Kevin from Better Than Ezra. Oh, I think that's Stephen Perkins. Yeah, Stephen Perkins from Jane's Addiction. And this one's a great one. It says, To Charlie, Love, Joe Perry. So pretty cool. Joe Perry, guitar player, of course, of Aerosmith. And I'm sure more Aerosmith you'll see. Here's Steven Tyler underneath. This is a good one. This is Carrie Underwood. And so Carrie came up here and sung a duet with Stephen for an Aerosmith record. My son was actually leaving he was only like maybe 4 or 5 at the time. So they were leaving to go and see Sugarland play, and Carrie Underwood pulls up. And this is the surrealness. Those of you like myself that didn't grow up in entertainment, don't know anybody, before you get working in the business. I didn't know anybody, quote unquote, famous when I was a kid. Nobody. The most famous person was my grandfather, who was a wonderful person. That was the famous person in my life. But I remember we had been watching American Idol the night before, and Carrie Underwood was on it. She was on like a guest coming back. And so my son is like 4 or 5 years old, and very matter-of-factly, he's walking down to go to the car, up pulls an Escalade, and out gets Carrie Underwood. And he's like, "You're the pretty lady from TV last night." And I just remember thinking to myself, my mind was blown. What a different world and a different experience, I should say, he's growing up with than what I did. That was not my experience. My experience was 5 of us living in a 4-roomed, semi-detached bungalow, which was about 650 square feet. For those of you in America, you'll know how small that is. Smaller than my studio is where I grew up. So quite a different experience. Oh, this one's really great. This says, To Charlie, This Tool Kills Hate. And that is from the amazing, you can get that in focus, Wayne Kramer from the NC5. So Wayne Kramer wrote that. What else do we have here? I've got to turn it around and have a look. Oh, there's Graham. It's Graham Coxon from Blur. There's Graham there. This is Tom Hamilton. For those of you familiar with Tom Hamilton's signature will know how he does it. Turn it up the right way. He draws like a little picture of himself, says Tom Hamilton. For those of you who don't know, that's the bass player from Aerosmith, and there's his signature there. I'm trying to figure out who's above it. Oh no, this is terrible. I don't remember who did that. Oh goodness. We'll just pretend that I didn't see that. Anyway, it's quite a wonderful selection. Slash was here and I forgot to get it signed because I'm an idiot. So did Slash sign anything else for us? I don't think he did, but we'll get more. So anyway, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's a guitar that we tried to get, big rock stars to sign for my son. And like I said, not the world that I grew up in, not the experiences I had as a child. But, my grandfather was a hero. My grandfather was a rock star. I'm sure, just like that, many of you have family members and friends that maybe are not famous, but sure as heck are rock stars. So let's get stuck into some questions from our frequently asked questions. This is a great one, this one. How would you handle recording a band where the guitarist's sound relies heavily on stereo effects and pedals? Do you record in 2 mono tracks? If so, would you then double those tracks as with mono guitars, or would you record mono without the effects and then reamp? I learned a long time ago, and I think most importantly from Dave Jordan, about this kind of stuff. I've had many mentors, and you hear me talk about Dave Jordan, Don Smith, God rest his soul, an incredible talent, and of course, Jack Douglas. And I would say they all have one thing in common, especially when you think of like Dave, who came up, through the 80s on tape, and then the early 90s as he turned into a massive producer doing Jane's Addiction and Alice in Chains and like so many huge defining rock records. He was right there at the start of like the digital revolution. He was using sound toys to, do comps on vocals. And then he did, early drum edits and, all the kinds of stuff that we take for granted now as being really easy to do inside of a DAW. He was doing them on little computer screens in 4 tracks and then transferring them back to tape. So he was like super cutting edge. He was the first person I ever made a record with using tape and Pro Tools. In the mid-90s, he recorded onto tape, dumped it onto Pro Tools, did some editing, put it back onto tape. Super smart guy. And he insists, and this is like almost a one-word answer. No, that's a joke, but it's a very straightforward answer. When you're working with a guitar player that has a lot of pedals, a lot of effects, you capture what they do. And that sounds really Warren, that's obvious. What I mean is like, how are they playing shows? Do they have 2 amps? Are they sending a DI out to the front of house because they might have an amp sim on it or an impulse responses, blah, 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 whatever it might be. You need to be capturing that because musicians, just like singers, perform to the sounds. So don't, if you want to capture a DI, I get it. If you want to capture a DI and then try and do some other stuff afterwards, totally understand. Maybe you want to reamp it. I get all of that thing. However, the guitar player who's written those parts will have pedals set up, delays, choruses, reverbs, all of that kind of stuff that they're playing to. They're composing their ideas in a rehearsal room or in a recording scenario, in pre-production, in demoing, whatever it might be. And the parts and the sounds are linked. They are completely linked. So you need to capture that first and foremost. One of the biggest mistakes I have ever made is to outthink the guitar player and fall flat on my face, where I'm like, oh, I'll just capture some DIs and do it later with my effects. No, that was a disaster. So what I ended up doing was like using onboard delays, fancy expensive plugins with fancy expensive saturation and fancy expensive chorusing and reverbs and flanging and all these wonderful things. And I could not get a sound that was even remotely what the guitar player wanted to hear. So always, 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 first and foremost, capture what the guitarist is playing, the sound they use. Typically what you're talking about when capturing stereo would be one of 2 things, 2 amps with a mic on each amp. That's the first thing. Now, if you're talking about a stereo multi-effects output, take it out, put it straight into your preamps. If the guitar player is usually, like I said earlier, sending to a PA, great. But maybe they have impulse responses on them. Maybe they don't. Maybe that's what you do when you record into your DAW. You put some impulse responses on it there. Totally understand. But the bottom line is make sure you record the sounds that they've come up with. Because I guarantee you as a guitar player, and every guitar player I've ever worked with, everyone, their parts and their sounds are linked together 100%. So don't try and outthink them. Capture what they've done. But if you want to print a DI as well, I get it. It's always good for safety, great for editing, nice to have a DI. But don't mess with the artist, the guitar player's sounds. How would you describe what it takes to be a credible producer and engineer when, as in my case, I'd like to focus on an old school ecological style production, where less is more and the quality of simplicity would be enough to make it work. But then also being able to compete against mainstream stuff. That's really interesting. I think about this all the time. I just did the ID 14 demo a couple of days ago. And if you haven't checked that out, go check it out. Multi-tracks, etc. I didn't edit a single thing on that. Nada, nicked, nothing. No vocal tuning, no correcting the bass, no correcting the drums, no correcting the guitar. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what's smart about that, Warren? Back in the days of tape. Well, I made records at the tail end of tape. And we couldn't cut. Well, you could, but you couldn't cut individual tracks on tape and move them around. But what you could do is punch in and fix. And that's what we did. You keep playing and playing and playing and punch it in until it was tight. And you got beautiful sounding tight recordings. That's the way records were made. Nowadays, of course, you can record it twice, do a really quick comp, and then move a couple of things around that were out of time. I didn't do that on that last one. And I didn't do it on that recording because I sort of wanted it to breathe and be raw. And the strange thing is I was a little hesitant. I was thinking, is anybody going to say it was too sloppy? Because it's the live piano, nothing edited. Live vocal, nothing edited. Live drums, I think, how many takes did Blair do? 1, 2? Usually does 1 or 2 takes, and we choose one. So it's like a take, and 1 of 2 takes that he did on the song, and we used it. We don't go in there and spend hours overanalyzing it. Bass, I just went through the song and got to the end of it and probably stopped and fixed something or made a mistake. But essentially, those were takes. And the reason why I'm talking about it is I sat back and watched the comments and thought to myself, is anybody going to tell me this is sloppy? Is anybody going to tell me it doesn't sound modern? And I realized that the performance, especially Steve is an incredible singer, and the song that he wrote, which is beautiful, outweighs all of these things. So really, the number one answer to your question is the song outweighs all of these things. Isn't it interesting that the biggest star in the world at the moment is, Olivia Rodrigo, who his album has been out for about 3 or 4 months, and she's already almost as big a star as somebody established like Ariana Grande. Now you're probably thinking, Warren, why are you talking about a pop star? I'm talking about a pop star because it's got guitars in it. There's whole tracks with piano and electric guitars. What? Say it ain't so. And it's refreshing to hear a teenager write songs to have instruments in it that we all relate to. And one of the things I love is the big roomy drums, kind of a 90s drum sound with electric guitar, stereo electric guitar, little tiny bit of programming, some piano, but more about the vocals. And there's nothing about that production. I'm sure there's songs on the record that prove me wrong, but the big hits have come out, and they're 3 number 1 singles now? All of them sound like something you could record, not taking anything away from the incredible songwriting. I mean, the songwriting production on it is wonderful, but it sounds like good, well-recorded roomy drums with well-recorded electric guitars and a beautiful piano and some great vocal recording. I don't hear excessive amounts of tuning. Did they tune a note or 2? Of course they did. Everybody does. I'm sure there was some fixing, but it's not excessively done. And it's selling to teenagers. So this fallacy that we've all kind of bought into, all of us, myself included, that all pop music has to be absolutely gridded and perfect and have swells and explosions and it's there if you want to highlight how bad modern music is. But it's refreshing that a teenage girl is one of the biggest stars in the world right out of the box with real instruments in it and production. Most importantly, production that you can relate to. Production that you can listen to and go, I understand this. I was just talking to my very, very good and old friend, Louise Goffin, about this exact same thing. She was like, I get it. I hear Olivia Rodrigo's record and I get it. It sounds like music that I love. Yeah, is it a bit poppier? Maybe. But ultimately, you're like, I get this. It's a logical transition. So this whole Olivia Rodrigo thing that I'm on at the moment is just to say it can be done. It can be done. If you want to record things simply and inherently capture great performances, there is a place for it. There's a place for it from a folk level. Placements in film and TV, talking about placements, there's nothing more compelling than a singer-songwriter with a voice cracking with emotion in a love scene, in a breakup scene, in a movie or a TV show. God, there is room for everything. One of the biggest things that absolutely drives me nuts is this wagging figure ranting mentality that it's all just about Spotify top 40. We know that's not true. There's a lot more outside of the world than just what's in the pop charts. You know, there was a great thing, I think it was John Peel or Andy Peebles said, for those of you who remember those guys in the 80s in the UK, made a point of saying for every Beatles and Rolling Stones, there was tons of stuff in the British charts that was just absolute trite, just like silly little novelty songs. In 1965, it wasn't just the cool bands. Yeah, there was cool bands. There was the Beatles, there was the Stones, there was the Who and the Kinks, but they weren't all in the top 10 at the same time. There was plenty of other stuff in between that you look at now, and it sounds like almost like comedy records. So there's always going to be amazing music. And sometimes it's going to be really, really popular. And other times it's not going to be top 40. But that doesn't mean it's not valid. It doesn't mean that it's not making money. There's plenty of musicians out there that are making great, great recordings that maybe aren't household names, but they're getting placements in film and TV. They're selling out huge shows. So don't be weighed down, because I read your question, and the thing that worries me is the phrase, and I understand your position. I understand your point, sorry. It says, but then competing against the mainstream stuff. Well, the mainstream is a lot more varied. If you just want to take the echelon of Spotify pop top 40, of course it's quite narrow. But at the moment, it has an artist in there with pianos and guitars and really, really great songs. So yeah, at that, people of my age group, Generation Xers, are absolutely loving and thinking, thank God that kids love music again. Anyway, kids have always loved music. My son's 14. He likes Steely Dan, Donald Fagen, and music I've never heard before. And he likes weird, eclectic. That's what I love about this new generation, the Z generation, as they're being called. The Z generation for the UK members and the Germans. What I love about them is they love all kinds of music. Remember, as Duke Ellington said, there's only two types of music, good and bad. All right, thanks ever so much for watching. This has been a lot of fun. Please give us your comments and questions below. And, what do you think about people that get really hung up on the Spotify top 40 pop as though that's the only music in the world? We know that's not true. I mean, it's a great thing to talk about and maybe get upset about. But the reality is like there's so much other music being made that is successful on a whole different level to just the top 40 pop charts. Thanks ever so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. See you all again next week. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, adio, goodbye, farewell.